Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's podcast, we have a year in review, and with our very special guest, Evan Efstathiou, Managing Director of Skysail Advisors, as well as CEO of Burmester Vogel. I won't get into Evan's full CV, but he has been in the maritime, digital, and tech game for a long time. Many of you has seen his world famous, and I call it world famous, or the gold standard maritime tech Skysail landscape map. And if you haven't, take a look at it. It's a really great intro to the industry. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss the year in review for 2020 and take a look on what 2023 will bring us in the maritime digital space. Evan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Good afternoon, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
So before we get at the topic at hand, I sometimes I'll ask people, tell me a little bit about yourself, and we get into the whole thing. When I was a little boy and I always wanted to work on ships or something like that. But in your case, what I want to do is tell everybody kind of what you're working on, and because you wear a lot of hats. And if you do look at your CV, and I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile, you wear a lot of hats. So tell us what you're kind of focusing on today.
Absolutely, Chris. Well, when I was a little boy, I wanted to be a treasure hunter and an Olympian. I feel every day as if I'm working on both still, because the maritime industry takes us all around the world. I still wear many hats. As you know, I founded Skysail Advisors in 2016. Skysail is really known for providing insights on the maritime technology landscape. So we produce global market intelligence and market coverage on which are the established vendors in the market, who are the up and coming startups. And really over the last few years, we evolved that to providing insight on what's happening in terms of funding in maritime tech. As a result of that, we do a lot of advisory to private equity groups, venture capital, help them understand what's happening in maritime, as well as assess potential investments in the space. On the Skysail side, we've always had a really unique position where we consult ship owners, commodity traders, even industry associations on what's happening in maritime digitalization strategy. We've worked on various projects involving vessel acquisition and financing and commodity trade development. And then even a little bit closer to home, from time to time, we opportunistically work on industrial real estate projects. So now between the two, I spend most of my time running Burmester Vogel. B&V, as it's known, is a company that I took over in 2019, world-known brand for demurrage and laytime calculation. Our software is trusted by over 100 of the world's most demanding commodity traders and ship owners around the world. At B&V, I'm really leading a digital transformation of laytime and demurrage, which, as you know, Chris, laytime is very complex, manually intensive, and there's a lot of documentation involved and a lot of time to actually settle out the demurrage claims. So we're starting to leverage things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud infrastructure, and even satellite IoT devices to see how we can digitize each of these pieces of laytime and transform the way laytime is done. Take out all the human capital that you need to do demurrage, as well as really unlock a lot of value that's tied up in the trade chain.
I mean, one of my questions that I always ask, and this wasn't a purpose of this interview, but certainly it's an interesting thing, is you probably get a lot of pushback from people like, oh, it's my job. But it sounds like that, as you start to develop these things, you can't take away that human, the deep domain experience, which is something that I've kind of come across, the saying a few different times, but certainly you can augment that with this technology. And it sounds pretty interesting because, like you said, the merge is just, I mean, it never ends and it's never the same. And, you rarely meet a demurrage claim that takes a couple of minutes to review and approve, right? I mean, there's usually one or two, counters that goes back and forth for sure.
Demurrage elicits this deep, visceral response of just related to the pain involved in the process. And so when you start showing people a little bit about what's possible with AI, you get a true wow factor. Right? It's really kind of exciting. Now, to your point, I'm a true believer that in the era of technology we're in now, it's not about automation to take people out of the equation. It's about developing solutions that empower the expert. So the expert's spending less time, retyping information or looking for the gaps, but rather you're providing them the intelligence and the information so they can use their know-how, knowledge of the voyage, the trade, the contract to actually both calculate it better and settle it faster. So I think this is a very exciting time. It's I would say in many respects early days, but things are moving so rapidly. I'm really excited for what's possible because it's a pain point that everybody knows, and it's a problem that hasn't truly been tackled in the decades that everybody in our industry knows demurrage.
I mean, decades. I mean, I think probably demurrage goes back to the beginning of time. I read a book a couple of years ago, and it was about Marco Polo, and what they were describing in it was charter parties. And I'm like, basically that's what they were talking about, the arrangements between the ship owner and the cargo owner and the master, well, who was the ship owner. But I mean, this is Marco Polo 500-600 years ago. It's kind of remarkable that we're fighting the same stuff that it was a half a millennial ago. But certainly that sounds really interesting. And I've heard that from other people that, one of the things people get nervous about sometimes is, going to replace me. But I've heard that from a few of my guests where somebody will go in and say, the pain point we're trying to address, it's not a matter of, oh my gosh, you're replacing me. It's, oh my gosh, you're going to make my job easier. And I think that, and then I get to use my expertise instead of chasing, an agent or chasing down paperwork, which is kind of the routine part of the job.
Absolutely. There's one more point to bring up about the human capital element. I've told a number of people this year, I believe every single one of my clients has seen turnover in the role involving demurrage, whether it's people retiring or someone moving to a new job. And so there's that institutional knowledge about your trades that leaves, and training a new person up is always tough. I mean, many people start their career in shipping. Like any chartering manager you talk to today will tell you, oh, I started on the demurrage desk, right?
Yeah, especially I find folks who didn't sail did some time on demurrage. Now it's not true across the board, but because there's no, it gives them a chance to learn the lingo rather than actually schlubbing around on a ship like I did. It gets you a chance to learn the lingo, starting pretty much at an entry level and then working your way up. It's certainly maybe not necessarily always true. I find that guys who sailed will end up in the operations department, not necessarily demurrage, but more ops because they have that. But certainly it is probably one or the other. I do know somebody whose spouse has been doing demurrage now as long as I've known her, almost 20 years. And she's like such a font of knowledge, but I look at it and go, how can you do demurrage for that long? But you're right, though. She has this level of institutional knowledge, and it's a chemical company she works for. That's
unmatched.
That's unmatched. I mean, you can't have a computer learn that at all, or AI or MI or whatever. It's very interesting. But so let's talk about the topic at hand. I was really excited to have you on. I've had you in the back of my head to let everybody know is when I started the podcast, I wrote down about 20 to 25 names, people I want on the podcast. And this is what they tell you to do when you start a podcast. You should have a running list of people. Evan was on that first list. I have it. It's sitting over here somewhere. And as I started to formulate and started to, because if you listen to podcasts and you listen to it sequentially, and sometimes I'll tell people I kind of doing things, and it just turned out that way into clusters. I just finished a cluster of 4 podcasts about seafarers and digitization and connectivity and things like that. So pretty cool. I had some other ones. I'm going to kick off next year with 3 relatively new companies. So starting the year with new startups. So pretty cool. So as I started to do this, I said, Evan's got this great background. What can we do? So I thought we could do a year in review, and maybe if he's not, if he's kind enough, we'll make this an annual thing where we'll sit down and we'll have a fireside chat. But so Evan, so in our space, in the maritime digital space, where we're the last dinosaur, what was your 2022 takeaways here? If you can bundle a couple of them for us.
Well, Chris, first off, this was a really big year for maritime tech, and I was kind of pleased. If I look back to my January blog post on the landscape, I kind of hinted, I have a feeling this is going to be a big year. It even exceeded my expectations. I think, even setting aside the fact that supply chain and maritime transportation was really front page news, thanks to the Ever Given. This is the year where maritime tech, as a subset of technology, has really come mainstream into both the public eye, but also the investment circles of private equity and venture capital. We saw a number of real monumental transactions for our market. These include the transaction with Vesa Nautical and Francisco Partners, followed by sort of like right after that, an acquisition of Q88, which brings together two of the strongest names on that voyage management side. And even the investments that we saw by Five Arrows and Insight Partners and Kepler, right? So very big transactions, very sizable valuations, at least from a maritime tech point of view. And it's really, in terms of themes, I think that even though the broader tech space has been there have been clouds forming in is the amount of funding coming into tech going to slow down? I think so far, we absolutely haven't seen that in maritime. I think that rather, the convergence of a number of topics in our market is making it so that we're seeing a healthy amount of investment. The strong, I believe, are going to be getting stronger. And so we're out for something interesting in 2023. So to that point, you asked me to think beforehand, what are some of the trends we're seeing? One is decarbonization and sustainability frameworks and technologies are really turbocharging new innovation and where tech companies are spending their money and where investors are backing things. The Poseidon Principles and the Sea Cargo Charter. These are initiatives from within the industry to really help kind of work together on making data more available and actioning on it towards decarbonization. So I think that theme is front and center. And then we're also seeing that many companies are exploring further investment in sort of the vessel visibility, vessel tracking, cargo flow monitoring. And then finally, there have been a number of these digital ecosystems and interconnected platforms that are sort of proposing to transform the way everybody works. So again, very busy year, very exciting time.
Just going back to your one thought here is, we did see a fundamental shift. One of the things, and people who listen to the podcast will know, one of the interesting things about living in Southwest Connecticut, similar to living where you are in Boston and other places, but certainly here in Southwest Connecticut, is there's a lot of people with New York money. They work in the city, or now they work at home, and they are involved in a fund or a very well-funded family office or what have you. And I had no less than two people in the last 15 months say to me, okay, Chris, where are we investing? I need to invest. The maritime space is my next identified space. I want to invest there. Where do we go? Right. And it's really interesting to start to hear that. And I talked to one of these guys, and we were just having a general conversation, mostly because our kids play baseball together. And I said, hey, is this changing your view because of the interest rates? And he said yes and no, right? It just changes how they have to, how they have to pay back the money, and maybe some VC people, some people who had some runway earlier, maybe that becomes a little more expensive. Are you hearing anything on your end that those interest rates, so I'm going to back off? Because it doesn't sound like you did. It sounds more business as usual, and it kind of works itself out in the wash a little bit.
I mean, on the broader tech market, you're certainly seeing valuations cooling relative to where things were last year. Generally speaking, I've also heard a number of tech companies say, hey, sales are a little bit slower this year than last year. I think in the maritime space, however, I haven't really seen that cooling. If anything, we continue to see transactions getting reported, funding transactions as well as M&A transactions. Part of it is that there is this realization that there's been a historical underfunding of investment in maritime by both the ship owner operator side as well as the cargo owner side of things. And so there's really just a lot of room to both unlock value and insights, but also, if you're going to start reporting on and scoring yourself on things like emissions and your overall performance, whether it's P&L or your operational efficiency, you need tech to do that. So I think that maritime tech is still seeing a lot of funding. And also, I mean, you know, up here we're in Boston, so we've got the benefit. We've got the guys over at Sea Ahead nearby that have really been doing an amazing job for, I believe it's like 5 years now, of creating visibility of the broader blue economy. And if you see some of these Sea Ahead events going on up here, it's just tremendous interest among people who haven't been part of what I think of like the maritime community, coming in and saying, hey, like, you know, we'd love to see how to apply machine learning in maritime. We've heard what you guys are doing and we think there's an opportunity. So great, like really spheres of interest coming in from funding and resources, right? People that are interested in coming in.
That kind of parallels into the next thing. Could you talk about visibility, right? And one of the things that we've had other guests talk about is, you know, Maritime's issue with visibility, right? And I want to pick your brain a little bit. We're going to pivot a little bit just into the social media side of things, right? And because I wanted to get your view not only on the digital and what's going on, but you know, you running Skysail and mentioning you know, the incubator up in Boston, up in the Northeast, and I have a lot of respect for them, and it's a really interesting thing because, like you said, they bring in people who aren't maritime people. You know, it's not the Offer family, you know, starting starting kind of this sort of startup pool, which is great, but that's a maritime name, right? This is, yeah, there's a little bit of maritime behind it, but they're getting all sorts of interesting folks. So what do you 2022, interesting year for visibility. Like you mentioned before, maritime was, and supply chain, especially in the beginning of the year, was at the forefront. Now we have, you know, obviously people are chasing Russian, you know, cargoes, and because they're all, you know, kind of fudging their AIS. At least that's what people are saying. What do you see about the maritime space visibility from a social media point of view? Because I think, you know, given where you sit, you kind of have an interesting perspective.
Well, I can tell you just from the visibility that I've seen evolve ever since, you know, I first published the Maritime Tech Landscape in 2017 publicly. I always kind of tracked my own map of who's who. And really social media was the platform I used, not for any particular reason other than I was connected to the people I've met in the industry. And I thought, okay, this seems like an efficient way to communicate. What's happened from there, just using that as a very specific example, is the reach is truly global, right? I mean, let's set aside the fact that every social media platform amplifies messages based on algorithms that they have that optimize whatever their kind of financial targets are. The reality is, as you mentioned at the beginning, my Skysail landscape, when I put it out there, everybody in the world has seen it by the next day. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people that say, oh, that's you? Oh, we use that at the board level. Or, you know, a kid will come up and say, hey, I just want to say thanks. I got my first job out of college. I used your map to show this company where they fit and where they're competing. Use cases I never thought of, or even many of the recruiting companies in maritime. They're literally emailing me, hey man, when's the next map coming out? Because we're seeing which companies are growing and probably need the help of a professional headhunter to hire sales guys. Take a ship broker like Chris Aversano and transform him into a product manager and a podcaster, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be doing too much of that, but yeah, I think that the visibility certainly has been. Actually, the jury's still out on that one, but I think the visibility is still certainly, you know, really it's improved. I think, you know, talking to some other folks, you know, there's always been the only time you hear about maritime is bad stuff, but I do think that as things progress, you know, and as people consider futures in maritime, you know, people, not just cadets, but people coming out of school, people that get attracted to these incubators and saying, hey, I want to be a part of that. I think that, you know, one thing we're going to see further is this improvement in maritime's presence, not just like, oh, they spilled oil, or, oh, they blocked the Suez Canal, or, oh, the price of my, you know, I can't get toilet paper because it's stuck on a ship off of New York Harbor because nobody can get in. It's not just that. I think that that's going to be one of the interesting things going forward. And that's going to be, I think, a generational shift for the folks younger than us of kind of understanding that and maybe improving that as we go forward. I also think that companies are going to start to slowly, some are really embracing social media as that beacon, and some are a little bit slower. And I think that that's going to change. As we start to flip to the second part of the question, which is what do we think for next year? I'm going to lead this off with a question for you.
All right.
That is, do you think we are going to be getting to a maritime tech bubble next year, or are we far away? What do you see the maritime tech space happening and evolving next year?
That's a great question, Chris. I'm seeing one trend as I reflect on this year, and indeed, like if you look at and the players which just jump to mind, right? Vesson Nautical, Kepler, Sedna, Zero North, right? What you're seeing having emerged out of 2022 is well-funded private equity and venture-backed tech companies that have built traction, right? They've proven out that there's an addressable market, and they've got the capital and the firepower and really the know-how, right? This is a business where I truly believe experts are key to anything, especially technology, right? You need the knowledge and the know-how of the trades to be able to build technology that the layman in shipping can use, layperson rather. And so you take these well-funded tech companies that have a really established presence, I think we're going to see those guys grow. So as I look ahead, they've got a really great runway to grow. I also believe as you look at some of the, call it smaller transactions that we've seen this year, like, Alpha Laval acquiring Bunker Metric. We saw an announcement about a Shipamax transaction with, I believe it was CargoWise. I think you're also going to see a phase where a number of companies that started up in the last, say, 3 to 7 years, they found a nice little niche, but haven't quite hit escape velocity from a venture funding point of view. I think you're going to start to see more and more of those companies find a good home in some of the bigger players where it's like, hey, they can add more value being part of a bigger platform. And the distribution capability of these bigger guys just makes sense. So I think we're going to see more of those types of transactions, which, they might not hit it out of the park from any kind of VC's point of view, but it's just something that makes sense, right? So a bit of consolidation of smaller guys, the big will keep getting bigger. At the same time, there's an amazing amount of funding that, you keep seeing, and it's not just this private funding. What I find really interesting, and I brought it up with Trade Department. I said, guys, in the U.S. Commercial Service, when we were at a conference in Rhode Island on the blue economy, I said, hey, look at Europe. Europe is providing grant money, and a number of maritime tech players are getting grant money to solve problems that are critical to the European Union, but also to build technologies that go broader. Companies like, I know Sieber in Finland had secured financing that was also supported by the Finnish government. Singapore, as you've seen a number of press releases about the money that they're putting into maritime tech.
Oh, yeah. And that's been going on forever. I mean, you look at, I don't know about government funded, but you look at where the hotspots are, whether it's Germany, certainly Denmark. I mean, Denmark, obviously it's led by the AP Moller Maersk and the umbrella that fell out of there, including Zero North, including the Maersk McKinney study area. You just look at all that, and that brings me kind of to my thinking, which is I think where consolidation is going to be is a lot where you are mentioning, but I also could see a place where you have these technologies that all try to solve the same emissions problem, but they slightly do it differently, and they solve maybe 30% of it. But then what I think is companies are going to start to look at, okay, if I buy 2 of them, I got 70%. And with my own product, I can fill in it. So all of a sudden I become a little bit more cohesive. And I think with a lot of these different ones, that could be where we end up going. But who knows? Do you see a space where there's more new companies coming up and like maybe a problem that we haven't approached yet? Because it seems like that's still pretty steady.
Well, I mean, again, you mentioned Germany. I was also going to mention, if you look at sort of the doc in Israel having raised
Israel, yep,
huge fund, making investment. So you have a bit of a sort of regionalization of different players tapping in to their regional markets. But then on the other hand, if you look at just this week, Harbor Labs announced a more than €6 million capital raise, which involved a broad pool of investors. Like, I do think you're going to be seeing more and more of these different regional players say, hey, let's all team up on a transaction. So from that perspective, I believe we're going to see more investment and as a result, more startups.
I don't know if we're necessarily near a bubble. I think it won't be a bubble that bursts. I think it could be, like you said, it ebbs and flows with the investment and things like that. But certainly, I hope that you put some of this down in your blog. I'm going to reference your blog from last year so that people could show that you were right. Maybe you'll be right again, man. I mean, we need like one of these prognosticators, like they go on in the beginning of the football season. They say, oh, the Jets are going to be 12 and whatever, but they're never going to be 12 and whatever, unless they play 3 seasons. But maybe this year, I'm going to have some of my Jet fans who are going to get mad at me, you New England Patriot fans. As we start to wind up here, I always love to ask one question. And I didn't put this on the notes because I actually forgot, and I'm not setting you up. Don't worry. It's not a bad question. You're well-published, well-read person. What are you reading, or are you writing anything these days? Like, what are you reading? Any interesting books going forward?
Believe it or not, Chris, I try to read a book a week.
Okay.
The past month has been really tough, so I'm still on one book for this month. But I have a couple of different stacks at home. One is sort of the shipwrecks and undersea treasures category.
That's because you wanted to be a
treasure hunter, right?
Yep.
And actually for Thanksgiving, instead of doing the normal figure out, do we go to my family's home or do we go to my wife's family's home, actually what we did is we took the kids and we went to Stockholm. And we spent 5 days in Stockholm with the kids. We went to see the Vasa ship.
Oh, yeah. That's the one that launched and sank, right?
Launched and sank, right? So we explained, here are all the treasures that came out of this ship here in Sweden. So the treasure hunter is still very strong in me. I've got, I love turning back to a number of business books. And I think one of the most wow books that I like to recommend that has me thinking a lot about this concept of cumulative knowledge and know-how is a book called Why Information Grows by Cesar Hidalgo. He was a professor at the MIT Media Lab. And he takes this concept of information as being, almost like a physical thing where it's like part atom, part bit. It's an accumulation of knowledge and know-how that's embodied in a person or an object, right? Mm-hmm. So the complexity it takes to build an object, that's embodied in it as information. So for example, Brazil may ship iron ore to China, but China ships computers back to Brazil. On a dollar basis, the balance of trade may be identical, but on an information basis, iron ore is information poor. You mined it and you shipped it. A computer is information rich. It took thousands of engineers time to build it. So I love this concept of any of these technologies we're building really being a reflection of all the thought that went into them and the different people's experience. It's a mind-blowing concept. So I've been reading that book, and yeah, I've got a long list of business books, negotiation books, all my favorite topics, but and treasure hunting.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm reading something called The Optimist: A Case for Fly Fishing Life. It's pretty interesting. I fly fish with my son. I've always wanted to fly fish ever since I was a little kid. Like, I always thought it was like, ever since that movie with Brad Pitt, River Runs Through It. I just like the visual of it, not necessarily the story behind it. I think I saw it once, maybe on a date, 30 years ago. But I love the whole idea of standing in the middle of the river and just trying to cast your thing. And I'll be frank with you, I don't catch a darn thing. But I am very happy just to stand out there. My son's, going off, and he's good at it. Yeah, me, I just stand there. I'm like, oh, this is nice. Listen to the birds. Nobody's bothering me. Yeah, I'm freezing. I think, are my toes still attached to my body? But beyond that, it's usually pretty good. We got a group of people here through a company called organization called Trout Unlimited that, they sponsor trips and stuff, and we just do some local things. So I'm reading this book. It's pretty interesting. It gets to the crux of it. And if you're into fly fishing, certainly it's interesting. Well, Evan, this was great. Thank you for coming on the pod. I hope that I didn't scare you away from doing podcasts, or at least this one. And I'd love to, my intention is to keep trucking along here with my podcast, and to have you come back next year. And then we'll go to the videotape, and we'll review what we said, and we'll see how wrong or how right we are.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of looking back and saying, well, what did we think a year ago? What have we learned? So happy to do that. And then the other, I would say the other little plug for Skysail is we have developed a database where we're tracking all these transactions and all the information on these companies. So early next year, we're going to be rolling that out as a little subscription service, just to provide even more insight. So the map will continue to be out there along with the blog posts. Is something that we just push out for the community to have and to use. But for a number of people that want to dig a little deeper, we've got some cool things coming, because to your point about social media, it's like we're seeing more and more people in our industry are looking to consume good quality information about the market. And so we're trying to just create that and help make awareness of why shipping is such a great place to be.
And frankly, that's kind of what I'm trying to do here as my creative outlet. Is just, we have a great industry, a great kind of niche that I've kind of fell into, as you alluded to earlier, going from tanker broker to product manager and now podcaster. Okay, great. But I'm enjoying the ride. So Evan, thanks again for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Take care. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast of The Last Dinosaur and our special look back at 2022 and peek ahead at next year and what's going to happen in the maritime digital space. Don't forget to check out Skysail landscape map. And if you haven't done so, I'll have those in the show notes. It's a great landscape. It looks at our community pretty good. The Last Dinosaur can be found in all the places you normally get your podcasts, such as iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube with the channel. Please like, follow, subscribe, add comments. They're always appreciated. And I appreciate everybody that's listened so far. And tell your friends to get some more listeners into the new year. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano, wishing you all fair winds and following seas.